So I feel like whenever we have some sort of an internal problem, for example depression, loneliness, or anything like that, if you are someone who constantly falls into depression, or you are constantly lonely, then one thing which you can do is to analyze like what is the thing which is causing you to feel those emotions, or for you to get into that internal state. And I am starting to feel like our internal state is dependent on our thoughts, which means that if you are depressed, most of the time it will be caused because of your thoughts. Of course, there will be some sort of an element which will occur or happen to you in the real world, which means that if you are feeling lonely, it's because you are sitting alone in your room, you don't have anyone to, rely on, you don't have any proper friends that you could talk to, and so on. And so, of course, that is one element which kind of like triggers the phenomenon which causes you to fall into loneliness, but it's actually not the real cause. Because any kind of situation, I have already made a video about this, any kind of situation is like indifferent, which means that we create the perception of that situation if it is bad or if it is good. And so if you are sitting alone in your room, you are reading something, or you are not doing anything, you feel super lonely. You feel lonely most of the time because you kind of like name that feeling in your brain. Like your brain will start to pop up with all those thoughts related to loneliness, or they are basically like reminding you of the fact that you are supposed to be feeling lonely, or that you are feeling lonely. And eventually, even if you weren't really feeling lonely, or you weren't thinking about that, you will eventually like fall into loneliness. Which means that if you are in a situation which could like trigger those sort of emotions of, for example, depression or loneliness, that's actually not the case. Most of the time those situations are there, they happen, but they aren't really the cause of those symptoms. Most of the time what actually causes us to fall into depression or into loneliness or into any kind of negative or even positive states are our thoughts. Because you won't normally start to feel lonely or fall into depression when there is no one to talk to, because it's actually a peaceful time, there is no one to bother you, like basically no one is attacking you, your life isn't in danger, but your brain constantly will remind you of the fact that you are lonely, you don't have anyone to talk to, you are in a state where you should be depressed. That's basically what your brain is doing. It's throwing thoughts at you which are related to depression, loneliness, and all those negative states. But as I mentioned, it could be reversed into positive states as well. And so what do I actually mean by everything that I'm talking about? I will make it more simpler so that it's easier to understand. So basically, if you are in a situation where anyone would consider it to be a situation which would trigger you to be depressed or lonely, then it's actually not the case. It's your brain that names or labels that situation as something that would or should cause you to be depressed, which means that situation on its own isn't the cause of your depression, it's your thoughts in your brain, which means that once you are sitting alone in your room, your brain will start to wander and start talking about how it's difficult for you to find somebody to talk to, how it's difficult to do everything on your own, nobody understands you, there is no one you can rely on, and so on. That's what your brain will do. And normally, like, you wouldn't fall into depression if you were quiet, like you wouldn't think anything about that situation. But since it's like our habit to do so, we always label a certain situation as bad or good, and eventually that will lead us to fall into depression or any kind of state which is kind of like related to that environment or that situation that you are in. There is one exercise which is amazing, and it's kind of like a defensive mechanism which you can use to avoid falling into those kinds of states. If you are somebody who constantly falls into depression or loneliness because you constantly have those like situations when you are alone, there is no one to talk to and stuff like that, you have to be mindful about what you are thinking about as well as what your thoughts are, which means if you are currently in that kind of situation, you are alone in your room, there is no one to talk to, you are starting to feel depressed, then you just have to realize that it's your brain telling you to literally fall into depression. It's also actually kind of like a fight mechanism of your body, that your brain literally starts to make you fall into depression for one reason. And that is because most of the time that situation is like considered bad, and so that means your body doesn't want you to be in that situation, and so it will create feelings of depression or symptoms of depression in order for you to realize that you can't be in that situation for any longer and you have to do something about it. But for now I will talk about how you can not fall into depression or loneliness. It's an exercise which might not work for everybody, and also it's something that you have to practice in order to get like the full benefits of that exercise. And so that exercise is literally just you. It could be sitting in your room, picking up an object, or just choosing an object which you are looking at, or some kind of an object in the background. I don't know, it could be anything, for example this. And if you see it in front of you, that sort of object which you have chosen, then just look at it. And normally what your brain will start to do is label that object, analyze that object, and think thoughts related to what you are seeing in front of you. And what you want to do in this exercise is literally to focus on it as much as possible and just observe it, basically. But the difference between what normal person would do when it would come to observing an object is the fact that you will turn off your brain in terms of your thoughts. So if you are looking at that object, what you are going to do is to observe it, look at it. You can also like use your touch sense, so touch it and just feel the texture, look at the colors, but don't name the colors, don't name the texture, don't name the shape of the object. Literally just look at it and analyze it without thinking any thoughts. And so it could be related to a meditation exercise, but this is better in a way that if you are starting to feel depressed, you can literally do the same thing that you have done in the exercise. So once you are starting to feel those symptoms of depression or loneliness, or your brain is starting to come up with thoughts related to those like internal states, then do the same thing you have done during that exercise. And if you are someone who actually wants to take action and wants to achieve something, then you have to try that exercise right now. You have to stop the video, do it, try it for, I don't know, 2 minutes, just analyze an object, look at it, observe it, but don't use your thoughts for analyzation, just look at it and observe it with your eyes alone, or you can use your touch sense, your smell, it doesn't matter, but don't use your thoughts for it. And it doesn't have to be an object in your room. You can look at an animal which can be around you, you can look at nature, you can look at something specific in the nature, so like a tree, it could be even more specific like a leaf, and just observe it without any thoughts. And so this exercise will teach you to basically turn your brain off. But it's a bit different than meditation, because most of the time in the meditation you are with your eyes closed, but this time you are actually focusing on some sort of an object, which is more relatable to real life experiences. And so once you are starting to feel depressed, just do the same thing you have done in the exercise. Either you can pick up an object or do it without any object. Just exist and stop thinking completely or altogether. And you will realize that there isn't really a need for you to start feeling depressed or lonely, because most of the time it's like a habit of your brain or the negativity bias which causes you to start feeling those symptoms or those internal states. And so if you can turn your brain off, it will eventually start to realize that there is no reason for you to feel those emotions or to fall into those internal states, because the situation which you are in is indifferent and it doesn't cause you to be depressed, nor does it cause you to be happy, which means you can literally choose what you want that situation to cause. And that's the power of thoughts. You can literally turn any kind of situation which is horrible, depressing, into a happy and joyful situation. And so hopefully this video was valuable, hopefully you learned something important or interesting, and if you have any questions you can comment down below. That will also help me boost the video, and afterwards you can watch this video next.